Well, if you've been with us the last couple of weeks, you know that we've been talking about how at home and at work or at school, in dating relationships with friends, with family, with work colleagues, even with complete strangers, we develop a filter, and everything that comes out of us passes through that filter. But even the most carefully monitored filter can fail. And when it does, things can escape that we never wanted to have running around on the outside. Remember, filters they aren't bad. They're just limited. Because our filter is downstream from where the actual trouble starts. If we're looking for a solution that's going to have a long-term effect on us, we're going to have to go to the source of the problem. So continually monitoring the filter, it's just not a good idea. It's just an ineffective solution. Now, thankfully, Jesus tells us where the location of the source of our issue is. And he says that in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34. This is kind of our theme verse that we've been looking at every week. Let's take a look at it again. Matthew 12, 34, last part of it. Jesus says, "For out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks." Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So when things pop out and we think, wow, where'd that come from? Well, Jesus would tell us what came from your heart. So this series has been about redirecting our focus from our filters to our hearts, because as Solomon explains in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. It's the wellspring of life. So gang, what Solomon is saying here, what Scripture is teaching us, is that our hearts need to be protected. So we've been using, this kind of for fun, we've been using classic movie monsters to help us sort of visualize the issues that can grow monstrously inside of us and wreak havoc on our hearts. We've talked about how guilt, like the mummy, is kind of an unrelenting force that can feel like it's just going to keep on coming and coming. And guilt is rooted in this undeniable feeling that I owe you something. And that the only way to really unwrap guilt is through the appropriate channels of confession. And I feel like I have to keep reiterating that point as well, because confession is kind of a dangerous concept sometimes with folks. They don't know what to do. Sometimes we feel like we kind of don't really have any guidelines, so we end up either underdoing it or maybe way overdoing it. So when you think about confession, just remember that no place in Scripture does it say you should shout your confession from the rooftops for all to hear. You need to carry it where it needs to go, and that's the appropriate channel for confession, all right? And we also talked about how anger, sort of like the wolf man or like a werewolf, is this sort of unbridled transformation that takes place in our life that can lead to a dangerous sort of spreading infection that not only comes out and infects us, but it can infect everybody around us. Certainly, it can affect everybody around us. And that this sort of chronic anger is rooted in the idea that you owe me something. You've taken something from me. And that the only way to really destroy that kind of chronic, beyond just one season of anger in our lives is the idea of forgiveness. Bringing forgiveness to the offending party, even if that offending party has absolutely no ability to hear you. And I know a lot of people that have to break some cycles in their family of behavior, and it may leave them with the need to forgive someone who has already passed away. And you think, well, how can I do that? Well, it's just as simple as doing it. Now, you may have to do it many different times before you realize that it's actually coming out of you with the kind of cleansing heart that's needed to really get rid of it once and for all. But that's okay. If you forgive someone once, and later on you feel like you're still carrying it around, then just forgive them again. It doesn't mean you have to go to them again. Forgive them again. And then last week we talked about how greed, sort of like a vampire, sort of like Dracula, has this unquenchable thirst for more. That we usually don't see greed reflected in ourselves because it's rooted in this idea that I owe me something. And that the best way to kind of disintegrate or expose greed to the sunlight is through generosity. So those are the three things we've been through so far in this series. We're kind of kicking into the last week. And so as we move on, let's pull out the popcorn, theoretically speaking, or the donuts, as the case may be, and the coffee, and set the scene for our final monster. It's late at night, of course. And deep in the heart of a dark castle, a laboratory is bubbling and brimming with activity. As the electrical storm outside intensifies, a hunchbacked assistant raises a table into position. Just then, a huge bolt of lightning strikes the rods on top of the castle, and the hunchback's master cries, "Pull the switch!" Electricity from the lightning surges into the laboratory and is focused into the machinery attached to the elevated table. Then all is quiet for just a moment. But then the mass on the table begins to move. Dr. Frankenstein has successfully animated his creature. For this one, we can cue a thunderclap, a hideous henchman's laughter in the back, and then the mad scientist shouting, "It's alive! Alive!" Right on. There we go. Although there have been many renderings of this creature, undoubtedly the most popular portrayal, again, belongs to the amazing classic monster movie actor Boris Karloff. There it is, right there. I mean, you don't get more creature than that right there. In fact, this may be the most recognizable movie monster of all time, which is sort of ironic considered how often this poor guy is mislabeled. You ever think about that? People typically refer to him as Frankenstein. But the reality is, that's not his name. That's the name of the doctor / mad scientist, I would lean more toward mad scientist than doctor, who made him. And the monster itself never gets a name. Tragic, really. I think Phil. It seems like he would have the good doctor's last name, and Phil Frankenstein just seems like a good name, you know? I mean, I feel like he could do your taxes, you know, really. I mean, like, anyway. The idea here is kind of tragic when you think about it, though, in reality. When Mary Shelley, who wrote the original book, when she wrote the story, she actually referred to him first as the creature and then later as the fiend. So things went kind of downhill for this poor guy, not uphill. Now this week, the heart issue that we're going to describe is and explores jealousy or envy. And Frankenstein's monster is the perfect representation. Again, these things really kind of write themselves, honestly. Here's what I mean. Jealousy begins with comparison, and it always leads to carnage. Jealousy begins with comparison, but it always leads to carnage. The earliest movie adaptation of Frankenstein was this 12-minute silent movie that was made in, believe it or not, 1910 by none other than Thomas Edison. Yes, that Thomas Edison, that guy. light bulb, electricity, phonograph, Thomas Edison. Yeah. I mean, he was into all this media stuff. And so this was just another opportunity for him to exploit another one of the mediums that he was pioneering, right? So Thomas Edison's film company created this 12-minute movie, and the monster for the time period was actually pretty good. Now, we got some really grainy, awful kind of pictures, you know, but that is the original kind of monster. Now, I wish that you could see. I know everybody's like, Jeff, come on, man. The monster's pretty good. But if you were to look at him, like all life-sized, he was largely bandaged up, and somehow he looked deformed. He literally looked like he had two different, well, he did have two different arms, but they looked like they were different lengths. I mean, it was, for his 12-minute movie, it was actually pretty grotesque and fairly effective. Now, I also searched for a depiction of this key scene in the movie. It's only 12 minutes. You'd think that they would have still frames of almost the entire movie, and maybe they do someplace, but I have never been able to find a good one, of this one section of the film, which is kind of the key pivotal point of the entire movie, really one of the key pivotal points of the story itself, when the creature is coaxing the doctor over to a mirror where it compares its appearance to his. And the creature is clearly upset by the disparity here between how hideous it looks compared to all the actual human beings around it. In short, though it's tragic, the creature is jealous, envious of the doctor. Now, envy or jealousy is really an ungodly response to God blessing someone else. I'll say that again. Envy is really an ungodly response to God blessing someone else, someone other than me. This is why Dorothy Sayers so astutely wrote, "Envy cannot bear to admire or respect." The kind of jealousy that we're talking about today is the kind which parallels that definition of envy, and it always involves comparison. The question is, when it takes hold, why do we do that? Why do we get so hung up on that comparison trap? I think it sort of starts out kind of at its foundation, because we are trying to dig at the roots here. It goes all the way back to sort of the beginning of all things for humanity. You know, we're all created in the image of God. And part of what that means is that we have hardwired into us an inborn sense of justice, of fairness, because our Creator is just. But we, guys and gals, are finite. Like, we have a beginning and an end. And on top of that, we're fallen. We have a nature that's been corrupted by sin. So when you combine those two things, the fact that we're finite and that we're corrupted by sin, we're fallen, with sin kind of darkening our hearts and our minds a little bit, it means that our sense of justice doesn't always operate correctly. We tracking? Our sense of justice doesn't always operate correctly, because though we have a sense of justice buried deep inside us that was modeled after our Creator, were made in His image, the fact that we've got that sort of beginning and end lifespan and the corruption of sin sitting between us and God when we look at things and we want justice, sometimes our system doesn't operate as fairly as his. Now, when a young David, King David, soon to be, but not yet, was serving King Saul, he was so successful in everything that he did that Saul asked him to do, in fact, that his accomplishments began to exceed those of the king. In fact, there's this really interesting kind of, you get the feeling that it was a very spontaneous thing that had happened, but is recorded in the Old Testament of the young women singing songs to kind of as the army comes back from battle to welcome them home. And they began singing this song, Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that for most dudes, if you're Saul, you're at least a little bit uncomfortable. But when you have an ego the size of Saul's and a kingly appropriation of authority and power attached to it, it's kind of blown out of proportion even beyond that. So every time they come back from battle, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. And eventually Saul gets jealous of David. He's not liking the attention that this young upstart in his court is getting. And so he tried to out him on multiple occasions, and in fact eventually tried to kill him on multiple occasions. You can read in places like 1 Samuel 18. If you want to look it up later, 5 through 11, interesting story. All I can say is I played music in front of a lot of people, but there was never a point, ironic that I use that word, never a time when somebody in the audience picked up a spear and tried to pin me to the wall as I was playing music. That happened to David in the throne room, basically. Saul was often kind of tormented, troubled in spirit, and David was an accomplished musician. He would ask David to come in and play. And there's this story of him playing and Saul being so troubled, he grabbed the spear that was sitting by his throne and threw it at David. And David jumped out of the way and grabbed his harp, which I happen to believe is the forerunner to the guitar. And the spear embedded itself in the wall. Now, if you're strong enough to throw a spear into a wall, you're strong enough to pin a man to it with that spear. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. Saul was definitely a warrior. He stood a head above everybody else in Israel. He was the tallest guy in the country. So he was probably a pretty big guy too. So he had the physicality now that was backing up his jealousy. It's a dangerous time for David. But interestingly, one of the most amazing stories about jealousy that's recorded in the Bible doesn't happen to Saul or David. It takes place during the reign of David's son Solomon. And this is a fascinating piece of literature here. We're going to read the whole story. Just in case you haven't ever seen this story, if you want to turn with me, it's in 1 Kings chapter 3 in the Old Testament. You can follow along here. But you've been hearing me for the last couple of weeks talk about how the scripture describes, and I believe, Solomon to be the wisest man who ever lived. This is an example of how he leverages his wisdom in a very unusual way, a way that would probably be considered completely politically incorrect today because we can't do anything today at all. That's another story. But interesting how it turns out, all right? Let's read. Verses 16 through 28. Now 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One of them said, "My lord, this woman that I live with, and I live in the same house, I had a baby while she was there with me. The third day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There was no one in the house but the two of us. During the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him. She got up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while your servant was asleep. She put him by her breast and put her dead son by my breast. The next morning I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't my son at all, not the son that I had born. The other woman said, "No, the living one is my son. The dead one is yours." But the first one insisted, "No, the dead one is yours. The living one is mine." And so they argued before the king. You get a feeling that it probably lasted longer than is being recorded here in Scripture. The king said, "This one says, 'My son is alive and your son is dead,' while the other one says, 'No, your son is dead and mine is alive.' Then the king said, 'Bring me a sword.' So they brought a sword for the king, and then he gave this order: 'Cut the living child in two and give half to one and half to the other.'" I'll let you process that for a second. Take a deep breath. Remember, he's wise, so give it a second. Let the story play out. Don't tune him out, okay? Don't tune him out yet. Not yet. Spoiler alert, I don't think he ever intended to do that. Okay? All right. I just want you to hang on with me, okay? The woman whose son was alive was filled with compassion for her son and said to the king, "Please, my lord, give her the living baby, don't kill him." But the other said, "Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in two." Then the king gave this ruling: "Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is the mother." Wisdom. Never intended to harm the baby. But wisdom understood that a mother's love for a child would compel her to do anything to save that child's life, including surrendering that child if it meant that the child was going to live. And the fact that the other woman was compelled to say, "Yeah, that's okay." When our finite, fallen sense of justice or fairness gets tangled up with our desires, we end up with jealousy. But this is where it gets really interesting, because when it comes right down to it, when I'm jealous, I don't truly want what's fair. A little bit like the second woman in our story. See, I don't really need to have what's fair. I just want as much as you have. And actually, if I'm being completely honest about what jealousy does to us, I don't just want as much as you have, I want what you have. I wish that I had Jesse's girl. That is a good guitar song. I don't care who you are. All right. Tip of the hat to Neil Giraldo, who played guitar in that song while he wasn't playing for his wife, Pat Benatar. We want our circumstances to change so that they match the circumstances of whoever or whatever makes us jealous. Don't we? Isn't that really the case with jealousy? We just want our circumstances to change so that they match the circumstances of whomever or whatever is making us jealous. The thing is, even if you got what you wanted, you wouldn't solve your problem, because jealousy isn't a circumstance issue. It's a heart issue. So even though it tells you, you want that, and you don't just want something like that, you want that. If you got that, it wouldn't make you happy. It wouldn't make you satisfied. It wouldn't pacify that thing growing inside you. Because again, it's not an acquisition issue. It's not a do I have this issue. It's not a circumstance issue or a person issue. It's a heart issue. So even if you could afford the X model of whatever it is, even if you lived in that neighborhood, even if your kids could get into that school or make those grades or make those teams, or even if you suddenly fit into that size or got that job, it wouldn't be enough, because jealousy, envy, it's a heart issue. It would just find somebody else or something else to concentrate its attention on, to torture you. I mean, there's always going to be somebody who is ahead of you. That is just the way the world works. I went to a very small Bible college. Very small. And when I got there, I had spent most of my life playing guitar in the basement, since we're on this guitar theme today. And so I had no idea of kind of how I played in comparison to anybody else. So I came in and was trying to find some people to play music with. And, full disclosure, so you guys know a little bit about my personality and how kind of weird, stubborn I am. When I went to Bible college, I didn't go to get a Bible college education. I went to find a band. Because I'd come to Christ, but I was just this kind of idiot guitar player kid who really loved God, and I thought, I want to do something for him, but I know that I can't be smart enough to do the stuff that I see the guys on staff at churches do. So I will find a band, and I will play behind a bunch of people that know that stuff, and I will just support them as long as I can. And I used to sit in church. I would sit in the chairs, and when I'd finished taking communion, which usually left me in tears as a teenager, I would put my head down and I would say, God, if I could just serve you for like 10 years, just let me do this for like 10 years, that'll be okay. And if I can do that, then I won't ask you for anything else. And so when I got a chance to go to college, which I didn't think would ever be a possibility in my life or in my house, I thought, this is the chance to do that. I'll go and I'll try to find a group of people to play with, and I'll see if I can do this thing that I told God I wanted to do for him. And along the way, I discovered through some people that had come to Bible college years earlier, kind of with some of the same ideas. As a matter of fact, our music professor had been a guitar player, not maybe with the exact same plan, but with similar ideas when he came, and he became kind of my mentor. And he walked me into the idea that maybe I could also learn things. If you knew my background, you would know how crazy that concept was for me to think about. Because I just believed I was a fool, and that I had my job was to stay out of sight. So the idea that I might be able to be used by him for something else, that was just foreign to me. But along the way, I started to play guitar because I had done that. And people started to compliment me on it, and they started to tell me things about my guitar playing, and then they started to talk about, was I the best guitar player in that school? Well, they thought that I was. There's nobody here that plays like you, Jeff. I would hear these things from people, which is odd for me because it wasn't on my radar to think like that. And then they would talk about, there are other guys that were here. We don't know. Maybe you're better than anybody that's ever been here, which is really not true at all. None of it was true. But because I wanted so badly to do what I was supposed to do for God, I started to think maybe that's what I have to do. And so guess what happened? Other guitar players came to the school. And they were really good. And truth be told, some of them were much better than I am. But I started feeling this threatening kind of thing. Like, what if I'm not the best? And there's a little point about halfway through my time in Bible college where I had to fight a lot of jealousy. And I had to wake up to this reality. There's always going to be somebody better than you. It may be in the room with you. It may be in the company where you're at. It may be in the town where you're at. But rest assured, my friend, no matter how good you are, even though I'm sure you're great at this, whatever it is, there's somebody better. And the amazing thing is, that's okay. Because somehow God used me anyway. And along the line, I got to learn a lot of guitar stuff from a lot of those guys that were better than me. And I even got to freak people out when they would say, well, Jeff's the best guitar player in school. And I would say, no. My buddy Jim's the best guitar player at this school. Totally. Or this guy Heath down the hallway, man, he's a good guitar player. Man, he's great. You know, there were all kinds of people that were good. And I got to start, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. I got to start doing this thing that is going to end our message today. And I think I'm so excited about it because I cannot wait for you to discover this great thing that happens. But to get to that point, we have to get to this point where we realize there's always going to be somebody better than us, and it's okay. It's all right for that somebody to exist, or for those somebodies to exist. The problem here is that as long as jealousy has your heart, the inevitable result will be the same kind of carnage that takes place in the book and the movie Frankenstein. Clearly, Saul's jealousy made him want to destroy David. And the woman in our story that came before Solomon, she was not the child's mother, but she was more than willing to see the child that she said she wanted destroyed. Yes, those events, Saul trying to pin David to a wall, and that woman saying, yes, go ahead and cut that baby in half, which is horrifying to me. Those events may be extreme, but a jealous heart often results in a destroyed relationship. So listen, either way, there's some kind of destruction that we're talking about here, guys. You see, if jealousy can't level things up, it will be temporarily pacified by leveling stuff down. This is what is often going on when we secretly celebrate somebody else's failure. Can we say that? Oh, I can't believe that. Does anybody ever do that? Come on, you're on Facebook. Captain Obvious even talks about hate liking somebody's trip on commercials now. The other side of that is secretly celebrating somebody's failure. When you say, oh, they wrecked that new car? Oh, their kids weren't able to stay in that private school? Oh, you don't fit in that sundress anymore. Uh-oh. You say they blew that project deadline? Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Really? No, not really. If we lay the heart out on the table and can kind of expose it for what it is, no, not really. Now, these people haven't done anything to us. Feeling good about somebody else's failure ought to really kind of make us feel a little slimy. So why is it that we sometimes feel good, at least for a little while? That's jealousy. That's jealousy right there. So I might think the problem is you think the problem is me, but the real issue isn't a problem with people at all. And this is where it really gets interesting. Take a look at what James says, James chapter 4, letter in the New Testament, toward the end of the New Testament, okay? I'm going to read you verses 1 and 2. And James writes, what is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? You want something. Sorry, you want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it. So you fight and wage war to take it away from them. Yet you don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it. Did you catch that? Other hard issues have been rooted in ideas like I owe you, you owe me, I owe me. People. This one is really unique because jealousy says, God owes me. Jealousy says, God owes me. This is a crazy concept, but hang with me, okay? And I'll show you exactly what I mean. If you're looking for a fill in the blank for number 2 here, I put it to you this way. Jealousy is ultimately rooted in a conflict with the Creator. Jealousy is ultimately rooted in a conflict with the Creator. Now listen, this is totally the story of Frankenstein and Frankenstein's creature, or monster, as the case may be. Now he might be lashing out at the villagers, but the creature's conflict is really with the one who made him, isn't it? And so it is really with us. With jealousy, our problem isn't with other people, our problem is with God, and in particular with His distribution system. Let's just lay it out right here. As Andy Stanley writes, the bottom line is if God had taken care of you the way He has some people you know, you'd be in a much better position relationally, professionally, maybe financially. The thing is, we say that, and we may not blame God directly. But when we talk about the ultimate fairness of the universe, what are we talking about? Well, that's not fair. Well, if I'd have been given that kind of break, or if I'd gotten that, if I could do that, well, then I'd have, well, if I didn't have to deal with this, then I could have this. But the thing is, are we here in our finite, fallen state, are we really even equipped to make that kind of judgment call? The Apostle Paul has a pretty good, pretty blunt answer when he teaches on this idea, and we find it in Romans chapter 9, verses 20 and 21. He says, but who are you, O man, to talk back to God? Shall what is formed say to him who formed it, why did you make me like this? Does not the potter have the right to make out of the same lump of clay some pottery for noble purposes and some for common use? It's a rhetorical question, right? I mean, he's not expecting anybody to say, well, does he? Of course he does. He's the potter. He's the maker, the creator. Some of it may go for a fancy serving bowl. Some of it may go for the pot that sits on the back porch. You remember earlier when I said that our monster was often mislabeled? We often call him by the wrong name, right? Well, it's like Frankenstein's monster is not Dr. Frankenstein. A person created by God, my friends, is not God. There are two sure things in this world. There is a God, you're not him. What I'm saying here is that there are some things that we are just not equipped to make a decision about. We don't have the infinite sovereignty that is needed to back up the idea of justice and fairness that we in our finite state are overlaying on everything. We can't see everything at play. And honestly, aren't you kind of glad? You want that kind of understanding and knowledge? I don't. I really don't. I mean, that's a lot of pressure. We're just not equipped to make that kind of judgment call. But James just said we don't have what we want because we don't ask God for it. So why can't we just ask God then? I mean, why don't we just ask God for it? James goes on to say that it's all about why we want it. There it is right there. James 4:3 says, when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. Now in this verse, the word pleasures really literally means gratifying sinful desires. That's the best Greek to English translation there that we could get. So it's very important to remember that this kind of jealousy is really very self-indulgent. So if you're asking for something out of jealousy, and you think, well, why? I know God. Why doesn't he just give it to me? Well, it could be because your motives are wrong. And honestly, if what you want is just to have what the other person has, I'm sorry, that's not a noble motive. It's just not. Now, here's the thing, gang. God still wants us to come to him with our requests. It doesn't mean that you should not talk to him. Even if you're wondering, well, maybe I'm just asking for this with the wrong motives. You can go to him and say that. Do you know that he can handle that? You can literally pray to him and say, God, I might be asking for this with the wrong motives, but this is kind of what I see. Now, here's the interesting caveat. At the end of that prayer, you could add this. If I'm not right, would you change my heart? If I'm not right about this, would you change my mind? Would you show me where I'm not right? Because God is in the business of helping us grow, and he wants us to do that. And I would dare say that gives him a lot of pleasure. For us to come vulnerable and say, if I'm not right about this, would you teach me what's right? Because the great thing about that is that it immediately restores the relationship to its proper status. I'm the clay and you're the potter. I'm the created and you're the creator. I may be finite and kind of clouded, but I know that you're infinite and you see everything clearly. So in the places where I'm messed up, would you fix it? Wouldn't it be cool if even if we didn't get the stuff that we wanted, we walked away happy? Now, wouldn't that be crazy cool? If we can live our lives, even in the places where we think we want something and we don't get it, walking away from a prayer time going, oh, I get that now. And it's okay. If I could have that every single day of the rest of my life, I would love to have that. Because that would give me a gift that I'm guessing that maybe you would want a little bit more of too. Peace. So keep asking God for everything. Just remember that he loves us way too much to give us everything we ask for. He knows that sometimes what we say we want is not what we really need. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, I would just say, spend some time with anybody that's a parent right now of a young child, and you'll be reminded of that immediately. Because kids are forever asking for stuff that maybe they want, but they don't necessarily need. And a parent has to make that decision of, probably not. Somebody earlier today or just yesterday was telling me about how his grandsons came to him and asked him if they could turn the large fans in the garage into a hovercraft. I mean, I know that's what you want. Maybe not what you need. May also be a big project. Maybe when you're 15 we can do that. I don't know. But sometimes what we want is not what we need even as adults. So if jealousy is coming into your life, how do we get rid of it? How do we kill this monster? I think the last point here, jealousy is destroyed by confrontation and celebration. And I know that'll take a little explanation so we can get into it. Jealousy is destroyed by confrontation and celebration. First one seems pretty easy. We have to confront the issue. Now the verses we're about to read, I'm going to go back to James and his book. They're really powerful, these verses here that we're about to read. They're a powerful tool for dealing with any of the 4 heart issues we've talked about. Okay? So along the way, I'm going to give you some specific practical steps that you can take if you want to kill the monster of envy or jealousy in your heart. So let's start by looking at James 4, 7 through 9. He says, "Submit yourselves then to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and wail. Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom." So, in the case of jealousy or envy, start by confronting the jealousy in your heart and giving it to God. When James says, submit yourselves then to God, if you're dealing with something, give that to Him. Too often, I think, we have somehow bought this story that we're supposed to get it together before we come to God. People even say, well, I can't go to church. I mean, I just got to get some things going, get some things together first. And I think, it's backwards. Those steps are reversed, If you really are looking to get things together, come to God first. I mean, He already knows what's going on. And quite possibly, the ingredient that's missing from helping you get it together is Him. He's the strength you need. He's the wisdom you need. He's the power that you need. And He's not at all put off by you coming and saying, I'm kind of a mess. I got this thing inside me where I'm kind of angry. Or I'm feeling so guilty about this thing in my past. Or I like stuff. And I'm kind of greedy about it. I kind of take it personally when somebody asks me about my stuff. I don't like to loan it out very much. I don't know. I've got this jealous streak inside me. And it's not just these 4 things. Gang, it's anything that you're carrying with you that you feel like is kind of weighing you down. Or that thing that maybe some days makes you think, well, I shouldn't go to church today because I'm just having a hard time. Like somehow you have to have it together to come into this group? Seriously? And look, I'm not picking on us. It's just that church in general is filled with a bunch of imperfect people who are struggling to make it, who hopefully understand that they don't have it all together and they need the God of the universe. If you're having a hard day, this is the perfect place to be. Hanging out with people that have that same feeling, even outside of this place, is helpful. So, submit yourself to God. You may need also, if the thing is jealousy, you may need to admit your problem is with God and not with people. And lay out all the stuff that maybe you think He owes you. And you might think, how could I do that? Well, He already knows. This is just an exercise for you. It'll be helpful. He can take it too. I mean, if I'm just being honest, you can be honest. You can't say something that's going to make Him go, oh, I didn't see that. I didn't see that coming. I didn't realize that about you. He knows your heart. I go back to the parent thing all the time. If you've ever had a child that, for one reason or the other, even if it was only in one circumstance, thought that the only way out was not being truthful with you, and they sewed themselves into kind of a corner telling little lies, and you thought, phew. In your head, you're kind of maybe thinking, depending on how old the child is or how good or bad they lie, you're thinking to yourself, this is painful. And when they actually tell you the truth, they just come clean, you're kind of like, finally, okay, I mean, now we can start to move forward, right? God can take that. Let him help you move forward. Let him deal with you, and then get right with him. Now, let's just go one more verse to James 4:10, when he says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. If jealousy has worked its way into a relationship, once you've humbled yourself before God, it might put you in the place where you can hopefully get right with that person. And there are times when, if jealousy's really worked its way into a relationship, you may need to go to them and confess what's been going on and ask for some forgiveness. Oh. And if that sounds hard, you're right, it can be, but the benefits of making the relationship right far outweigh the momentary difficulty that comes with it. And if you're wondering, why do I even need to do that? Well, because everybody here probably lives with a couple of relationships that they think, everything was going on just fine, and then something got weird. We're really fond of using that terminology now, aren't we? Well, how are you and that person doing? I don't know, it's kind of weird right now. Have you had anybody like that? You got anybody like that in your life where it's just like, some point it was like, I don't know, something got weird. Wouldn't it be crazy if that person came to you and said, you know what, I got to tell you, I was just a little bit jealous. And I'm sorry, because maybe I got a little weird. And you kind of look at it and go, oh, there it is. Now, I don't know, maybe some people are like, no, you're dead to me now. You were jealous. I mean, I'm thinking, I don't know. My relationships don't work that way. If they're good, actually, it's the kind of thing that makes relationships stronger. So, try it. All right, now, you've done that. Now you get to do this thing that I learned in college was the best way to kind of evacuate any weird feelings I had toward any of those great guitar players that were at the school. In humility, you celebrate them. Change your envy to gratitude. I mean, be grateful for what you have, and then be grateful for what is happening to them. Is that not crazy? Telling you. You talk about something that makes you feel liberated and free. If you've ever carried around something where you needed to forgive somebody and you did, that feeling of liberation is unbelievable. This is the closest other issue I can think of. If you can literally begin to celebrate the success of other people, it is so freeing. It really is. It's so freeing. And it's amazing how that will become, in other people's eyes, one of your strengths. Your ability to celebrate other people. You want to play well on a team? Learn to celebrate other people. I'm not sure I can find a much more practical thing to say to anybody that's an adult in this room. Learn to celebrate each other. Don't be threatened. Well, what if I'm still dealing with it? Isn't it insincere to try to celebrate somebody else if I'm not fully committed to that? I would say no. Did they have a good idea? Yeah. Is it a nice car? Yeah. Is that outfit flattering? Yes. Then say it. You're not you're retraining yourself to speak the truth. maybe for the first time concerning that situation, and amazingly, as you celebrate, God will use that to clear out all the gunk and that envy, that jealousy that's been deposited in your heart. And it's not insincere, by the way. It's surrender. And it'll kill that monster. It'll kill it. I've really enjoyed spending this time with you guys the last couple of weeks in this series. Now, finally, as we close out, I want to ask you this set of questions again. And I know I've asked them every week, but I'm going to ask you to kind of really think about them this week. This is the last time I'll say them to you out loud on a Sunday morning here in the next little while at least. But understand that as I say this, if you need to talk about any of these things, I'm happy to talk to you. Is everything okay in your heart? Are you mad at anybody? Are you waiting around for somebody to come to you and make things right? Have you had any extended, imaginary conversations with anybody lately? Do you feel jealous of anybody? Have you been avoiding someone because maybe they represent something you don't have, but you want? Have you recently secretly celebrated somebody's failure? Even if it's just you. Do you have any secrets that are just eating at you? Is there anybody that you hope won't ask you a particular question? Have you lied recently to somebody that you love? I'm going to ask Nicholas to put the very last slide up. There it is. When we start this prayer time, I'm going to ask you guys once again to pray this prayer out loud with me. Will you do that now? Father, teach me to guard my heart, for it is the wellspring of life. Let's continue to pray.